And this brings me on to why the hell, let's go back a couple of slides. We've gone from 6.5% to 14.6%, okay? You, in this room, have benefited from that growth in the private rental sector. The question is that figure going to grow or is that figure going to drop? Because if it's drop, you're in deep doo-doo. I know I don't look it, but I'm 46 years old. And
You look it.
it was a tough paper round. Bless you, my child, you'll go far. So, when I was in my early 20s, the first thing I did after coming out straight out of university is that you saved like hell, you went without. You had the bottom drawer, who here can remember the bottom drawer, and you went without the holidays, and you saved like mad because all your friends were buying houses at the time, and you saved your 4 or 5 grand for your deposit, 95% mortgages, because that's what you got. You went with that for 2 or 3 years and you built yourself up a deposit. You went to bank and mum and dad and they gave you a couple of grand. And you saved like hell and you bought your house. The question is this, why aren't these youngsters buying houses anymore? Because if they're not buying at the bottom, it's really hard for everything to go through. You know, the terraced houses buys the semi buy the detached buy the big detached, and then the bungalow, and then they carry you out in a box. So, it's true, it's live. So, here's a straw poll. If you ask anyone, why aren't the youngsters buying anymore, they come up with 3 reasons. So I'm going to ask you those 3 reasons now, and I want you to put your hand up on which one you believe is the reason why first-time buyers are not buying. So, first one, property's too expensive. Second one, job mobility. Third one, lack of deposit. Good, right, good. Okay. 95% mortgages and 100% mortgages. Who here can remember the Northern Rock 125% mortgages note from your mum? Please give Johnny a mortgage, back of a fag packet, and you got a mortgage, okay? The credit crunch wiped those mortgages out, something rotten. I used to be a bank manager and a estate agent at the time, and basically, if you wanted a mortgage and there was the lender of last resort was the Northern Rock, honestly, they'd lend one to anyone. So, when did 95% mortgages come back to the market? So there's another straw poll here, and we're going to start off with 2014. So, who here thinks 2014? 2013? Anyone, any low? It can't be any lower than that, can it? 2010? 2010? Yeah, not be that. When do you think 95% mortgages came back, sir? Could it be last year? Have a guess. You're going to be wrong anyway. Okay, anyone else want to throw in some?
I don't think it has.
Can you get a 95% mortgage? Yeah, as a first-time buyer. So what we going? What do you think, sir?
Yeah, let's say last year.
Last year.
2016.
Okay, 2009 they came back. Very close. Very clever. I'm not joking here. 2009 is when 95% mortgages came back. They were away for about 3 or 4 months. You're going to say, well, yes, but you've got to jump through hoops. Of course you've got to jump through hoops. You're borrowing 100 grand, 200 grand. Yes, with Northern Rock, can you give Johnny a mortgage, please? Oh, yes, here's 100 grand. Oh, we'll give you 25% extra, so you can do it up. Or spend it on fast cars and fast women, and the rest you can waste. Yesterday, I went on to Money Supermarket. Shouldn't do that. And I looked at what the first-time buyer rates were. These are not help to buys. This is not get a note from your mum. This is not anything, put your granny must have 100 grand in our bank. These are good old-fashioned 95% mortgages. Okay? Okay? 95% mortgages, which you have to jump through hoops, which is pay your bills on time, have no credit card, county court judgments. Call me old-fashioned, but if you've got county court judgments, you shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a flipping mortgage as a first-time buyer. But if you've kept your nose clean and you have paid your way, you will get a mortgage today. Yes, you have to go in and you have to get out your bank account statements and then go through forensically. Yeah, to see if you're not having payday loans and things like that, because they want to know that the house isn't going to get repossessed. Now, some of you in this room, not many of you, but some of you in this room can remember 1992 when mortgage rates were at 15%. Some of you in this room can remember mortgage rates of 17% in the late 70s. That doesn't look that bad to me. Now, if you read the Daily Mail says, yeah, you need to put 30% down to get the sexy rates. You've always had to put 30% down to get the sexy rates, 1.5%. But again, I don't think 2.89 fixed with £195 application fee is bad at all, I don't think. Do you think it's not bad, is it? These are publicly available. There were actually 144 first-time buyer mortgages. Okay, so I went on to Rightmove, my favourite website. Love Rightmove. And here is a bog-standard one-bedroom apartment in Buckland Hill. Sold £130,000. Well, that was the asking price, okay? So what I did is this. I went on and said, let's assume I bought this for £127,000 and I need to raise a deposit of £6,375, which is a lot of money. How much is the new iPhone X?
999.
Okay, and how much is it on it's £88 on if you want to have a contract. And then, how much is the holiday to Benidorm? Well, probably not Benidorm, Reefy. And life's full of choices. Those of you in this room who bought your first house, did you, whilst you were saving up your deposit, go on holiday to Tenerife? No, you didn't. Did you? Okay, we didn't have distractions like Sky Sports, £100 a month. Yeah, you got to watch footy, haven't you? We didn't have those distractions, but it's all about choice. You either have the iPhone X, £88 a month, you either have the and Sky Sports package with Sky Movies at £120 a month, and you go on holiday, or you go without those things and get yourself an iPhone SE, which are very good, and go without, and you might only have to go out twice a month on the razzle, not 3 times a week. Although we're going out for a beer tonight, aren't we, boys? Indeed we are. But look, £454 a month on a 35-year mortgage. £492 on the fixed rate. And if you rented it, £650. £454, £650. And you need to save yourself a deposit of £6,000, which is a lot of money. But when I bought my house 20 years ago, my deposit was £3,500, £4,000, which in real money terms, because wages have gone up, is about the same. So it's cheaper to buy than it is to rent. You can get a mortgage, so why the hell aren't these youngsters buying houses anymore? This is why. So I want to step back in time and have a look at the proportion of who has owned what in the UK going back to the end of World War I. The dark blue is private rented. The graph checks is owner occupying, and the bit in the middle is social housing, because we can't call it council housing anymore. But can we just agree to call it council housing here? So if you look, 1918, 25% of houses were privately owned and 75% were privately rented. As we go through the 30s, the number of homeowners steadily increased and the number of council houses increased. Remember, this is proportion. By the 1950s, 50% of houses were privately rented and 30% or 32 or somewhere around there were owner occupied. Then, after World War II, we had an explosion of council house building where the councils were building over 250,000 private council houses every single year. And what happened was owner occupying went up, but so did council housing, to a point where it actually got to its highest peak, council houses, back in 1979. What happened in 1979?
Rent out.
Sorry?
Was it the rent out?
Okay. Think of politics. Maggie Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher, in 1979, gave the right to buy your council house. Go back, look at what happened in 1979. You'll see from 1979 the proportion of council houses started to tail off. You see, the thing with council housing is this. You move into the lovely three-bedroom semi in the nice housing estate in your 20s. You have kids. The kids then leave, and then when you're in your 50s, you leave the three-bedroom semi and go and live in the bungalow, and then another family comes in behind you to rent the house. You then live in the bungalow until you die, then they carry you out in a box, and then the couple that moved in before you go and move into your bungalow, and it just keeps recycling all the way around, and you keep the house remains in the council stock, and everyone keeps the house. But what happens if you sell it? You're taking a house out of the system. And what you tended to find is it was only the nicer houses in the nicer areas that got bought. The ones in the not so nice areas didn't tend to get bought. So what you'll find is that the number of council houses tailed off throughout the late 90s and into the early 2000s. But have a look at the private rented sector. Notice how it was in the 1995, 96 when it was around 8% and it started to grow, and see how she has grown since. So in 2008 we were at about 11% and now we are there at about 17%. So when somebody says by 2025 we are going to be at 25%, we're only going to be where we were in 1972. And when someone says there'll be anarchy on the streets when we get to 30% privately rented houses, well look, we were at 30% in the early 60s. We have never been a nation of homeowners. It's just in the 60s and 70s and 80s it was an aspirational thing which was turboed up by Maggie Thatcher selling all the council houses. So what happened is everyone bought their council house on the cheap, and then a couple of years later sold them off. You had an influx of homeowners, but then we didn't have that second influx because you can't sell a property twice, because there can't be a new council house tenant moving in. So that is the first reason why we've become a nation of private renters, because there's always been a sector of the economy, people who never will buy, and they always used to go into to council housing. If there's no council housing to buy, and the housing associations aren't building anything, well, they're not building that much, well, who else is going to house them? You lot. Next, Housing Act 1988. Before 1988, the type of tenancy, depending on how the tenancy was set up, you could actually have tenants that could be there for life. And getting them out, be it a regulated tenancy or a protected tenancy, was really hard work. And if you really did want to get them out, then the technique was sending the boys round. There was none of this short-hold tenancies or anything like that. There was not that much protection for landlords. It was very much in the favour of tenants. Okay, but the Housing Act brought in the short-hold tenancy, which gave a lot more responsibility to the landlord, but it also gave a lot more protection to the tenant. But it did mean that if the tenant wasn't paying, you could kick them out without sending the boys round or going through a really heavy, long court process. Yes, you still had to get the law involved, but it wasn't as bad as it was. So it allowed landlords to be more flexible in their approach. The next reason, the third reason why buy-to-let has taken off, was the introduction of buy-to-let mortgages in the year of my marriage, 1997. Before 1997, if you wanted to borrow money for a buy-to-let property, you had to join the queue at the bank for commercial loans. So you were joining the queue with the person from the factory wanting to borrow £1 million for a new lathe. Now, if you are in business and you want to borrow £1 million for a lathe, you're often talking 1%, 2% or 3% over base rate. At this time, base rate was 6 or 7%, so you were borrowing at 9%, 8 or 9%. I'm being fluffy, I'm being approximate with the figures, but those are the numbers we were talking about. If you're borrowing at 9%, and if, can you remember in the 1990s, it was a pretty stagnant market. It wasn't growing that much. You needed, if you weren't going to win on yield, if you're not winning on capital growth, you're going to have to beat it on get it on yield. And if you're borrowing at 9, you want it back at 11 or 12, I'm just picking numbers, you would need to go to the lower end of the food chain to get that sort of yield. Because we all know the lower end of the food chain when it comes to properties, wood chip walls, single glazed windows, no central heating, coins in with the meter, been there, were these. No wonder people wanted to get out of those. Who'd want to live in one of those? But the thing is, in the 1997s, we had buy-to-let mortgages. And we had a new type of landlord that came along. Oh, it looks like it's, anyway, called the dinner party buy-to-let landlord. Let me just go to let's go to Allington, which is the real posh area of Maidstone. And we've got Barbara and Sue sitting at one end here with their Chateaubriand, cutting the thing. And we've got Jim and Sue here. And Bob says, oh yes, we've just bought ourselves a lovely buy-to-let property, Barrett New Homes, gorgeous, lovely. We went round this show home and it was just beautiful. We just had to buy it, so we bought one. And what happens is people are like sheep in this world. Well, if they're buying it, we'll go and have a look. Oh yes, we're getting property prices are going up by 20%. Yeah, and they were going up by 20% in 01, 02, 03. Didn't matter that the rent was covering the mortgage. Didn't matter. Didn't matter about yield because it was going up by 20% a year. We were making shed loads, so we're getting the garden rake in and raking that cash in, rake it in. Oh, and they were buying lots. But the thing is, they were buying these gorgeous houses. Beautiful houses. People weren't buying with this, they were buying with this. Oh, darling, we could look at that show home. It was beautiful. I really do love it. And I could live here. And then they go in and then they say, oh, darling, let's go to John Lewis and put a lovely new kitchen suite in, which will cost 10 grand. And we all know damn well that the tenants are going to wreck it, but it doesn't matter, darling, because it's our house. We've all been there, haven't we? You know it's true. They were buying this. The thing is this. That's gorgeous to live in. Before 97, the only properties you could rent were Rigsby rising damp style properties, and now all these dinner party buy-to-let landlords were buying these gorgeous modern things. Brilliant. No wonder you'd want to move into one of those. Stage 4. Getting hot now. Can you remember in 2008 there was that huge lift of properties coming onto the market? I bought it for 100,000, it was 300, now it's gone to 250, so I've lost 50 because I'm not losing it. They do think that way, you all do. So what happened was, people used to put their 3 and 4 bedroom gorgeous detached houses on the market. Oh, it's gorgeous. Lovely. You couldn't rent these 10 years before, but you could now. And now all of a sudden, people could rent a really gorgeous house that would take you years and years to go up the ladder, and for an extra £200 a month, you could rent a 4-bed detached house with all the toys. But here's the killer one, and this is the real reason why buy-to-let has and will continue on its growth pattern. That when I was 18, 19, 20, all my mates were buying houses, so it's kind of, let's jump on the bandwagon because that's what everyone does, because we're all sheep. Now, because mum and dad have been reading in the Daily Mail for the last 5 years, you need a 30% deposit, so you can get the 1.5% mortgage rate, not the 2.83. There's no pressure from their parents, from the older generation, to buy. Renting is not seen as a poor man's choice anymore. It is a choice. It gives you flexibility. And because bad news sells newspapers, no wonder the Daily Mail, let's be honest, every day, Mondays is Diana Day, Tuesday is Immigrants Day, Thursday is Brexit Day, and Thursdays woe betide the property market. It just goes on a rotation. Same stories for the last 5 years. And that's what's been happening. There has been a massive change in the attitude to renting. If I said to my parents back in 1997, I'm going to get married and we're going to live forever in a privately rented house, my backside would have been kicked from black and blue. I'd have been given the right act. You buy your house, son. Who of you here who's got kids in their 20s and they say they're going to rent, have you given them the right act? No one does. Because we've all been brainwashed by the Daily Mail trying to sell newspapers. That is the real reason why privately renting will continue to grow, because unless that changes, it will continue to grow. You see, like I say here, the British have never fallen in love with owning their own house. It's just what everyone did. And until we change as a society, it will continue to grow. And if it does continue to grow, we're only going back to where we were in the 60s and 70s.